When I first met Ethan, I believed I had found the man of my dreams. He was confident, ambitious, and had that kind of charm that could light up a room. He wasn't just successful, he was magnetic. He owned a growing construction firm that built high-end luxury homes across the state, and everyone seemed to admire him. I was a graphic designer then, just starting out, humble in my means, but full of big dreams. Ethan made me feel seen, valued, and loved, or so I thought. Our first few years together were everything I thought marriage was supposed to be. We laughed, we traveled, we built a home. I supported him in every project, helped him design proposals and presentations, and even managed the marketing side of his company for free. I believed we were a team, two people building a life and legacy together. But as the years passed, small cracks began to form. Ethan changed. Success made him arrogant. He started to look at me not as his partner, but as someone less. I began to notice how he spoke down to me in front of his business partners. How he brushed off my opinions as if I were just another piece of furniture in his carefully curated world. I told myself it was stress, pressure, maybe even exhaustion from work. But deep down, I knew better. The real turning point came one night when I accidentally overheard him talking to one of his friends on the phone. His words hit me like a knife. "She's too dependent. I'm the one who made her who she is. When I'm done, she'll have nothing." That night, I couldn't sleep. My body shook, not from fear, but from a deep, cold fury. I realized the man I married wasn't the one standing beside me anymore. He wasn't my husband. He was a predator disguised as a partner. And I decided right then that I would not be his victim. I didn't confront him immediately. That would have been too easy, too emotional. Instead, I started planning quietly, carefully, strategically. If Ethan thought he was the only mastermind in this marriage, he was about to meet his match. I started documenting everything. Every bank transfer, every signed document, every piece of company data I had helped create. What Ethan never realized was that I still had admin access to several of his internal business systems. I began to notice discrepancies, funds moving through shell accounts, money hidden from investors, shady deals that skirted legal lines. While Ethan was busy flaunting his wealth and flirting with his assistant, I was quietly assembling an empire of information, his empire. The breaking point came when he served me divorce papers. He didn't even have the decency to look me in the eye. The courier handed me a folder that said petition for dissolution of marriage. Inside, his lawyers had made it very clear. Ethan wanted everything: the house, the cars, the joint accounts, and even the small design business I had started on my own. He left me with nothing but my name. For a moment, I broke down. I cried until there were no tears left. But then, something inside me shifted. The woman who once believed she needed him to survive was gone. I had spent years standing in his shadow. Now it was time to build my light and burn his lies with it. I hired a divorce attorney, not a big-name one, but someone sharp, discreet, and relentless. Together, we began piecing together the case that would destroy Ethan's mask of perfection. I handed over the financial documents I'd collected, the proof of his undeclared assets, the emails linking him to fraudulent deals, and the contracts he'd signed under fake entities. When the court hearings began, Ethan walked in smug and confident. He had his high-priced legal team, his tailored suit, and that same smirk I used to find charming. He thought I'd crumble. He thought I'd beg. But the look on his face when my lawyer began unveiling each piece of evidence was priceless. As the judge's expression hardened, Ethan's confidence began to falter. He stuttered, shifted uncomfortably, and finally for the first time in years, looked small. But I wasn't done yet. While the court was freezing his assets pending investigation, I made my next move. Using the branding skills I'd honed while working for his company, I rebranded my design firm, turning it into a powerhouse for small business clients who'd been overshadowed by corporations like his. Within months, my business exploded. Clients admired my resilience and lined up to work with me. Ethan's company, meanwhile, began to crumble. The fraud investigation spread, investors pulled out, and projects were canceled. His reputation was shredded across the business community. One afternoon, I received an email from him. "Can we talk?" it said. I ignored it. Then came another. "I made a mistake. Please, I need you." And then another. "They're coming after everything. You don't understand how bad it's gotten." Oh, but I did understand. I understood better than anyone. A year later, the final divorce decree arrived. The judge awarded me not only half of his remaining assets, but control of several properties he had tried to hide under dummy corporations. The same empire he thought he would take from me was now mine. When we last met, it wasn't in a courtroom or a lawyer's office. It was at a charity gala. He approached me, his once confident stride replaced with hesitation. His eyes searched mine for something, maybe pity, maybe forgiveness. "You look incredible," he said softly, almost broken. "Thank you," I replied with a calm smile. "I always did. You just never noticed." He opened his mouth to speak, but I turned away before he could say another word. The music swelled, and I walked out into the night, free, powerful, and finally at peace. Ethan thought he could take everything from me. What he didn't realize was that I was the one who built the foundation he stood on. And when he tried to burn me to the ground, I rose from the ashes and built something stronger without him. He thought he'd take everything in the divorce. But in the end, I took his empire. When I left the courthouse that first day, the crisp fall air felt heavier than usual. My heart pounded, my legs felt weak, and I kept replaying everything in my head. The betrayal, the arrogance, the look of utter satisfaction on Ethan's face when he thought he had already won. I sat in my car for almost an hour, gripping the steering wheel, trying to process what had just happened. I wasn't crying anymore. I was angry. A calm, deep, bone-level anger that doesn't scream, it plans. Ethan had always underestimated me. He thought I was soft. He thought I was naive, the kind of woman who would crumble under pressure. But he forgot something crucial. I had been beside him during every stage of his success. I had built presentations, made deals sound perfect, charmed clients at dinners, and saved him from PR disasters. I knew every inch of his empire because I helped create it. And now I was going to take it back, brick by brick. The first few weeks were quiet. Too quiet. Ethan's lawyer sent me emails, threats, settlement offers that were beyond insulting. They thought I'd be desperate for money, that I'd fold to get it over with. But I didn't. Instead, I hired a forensic accountant, someone who specialized in uncovering hidden assets during divorces. When I handed over my folder of documents, the accountant looked at me and said, "You've done half my work already." That was the first moment I truly smiled. The nights were the hardest. I'd lie awake in the house we once shared, surrounded by the echo of memories that no longer felt like mine. The laughter, the late-night wine, the whispered dreams about our future. Now those same walls felt like they were mocking me. But I refused to move out. He wanted the house, and I wanted him to see that he couldn't chase me out of the life I helped build. Ethan's arrogance blinded him. While he paraded his new girlfriend, his assistant, of course, Through fancy restaurants, I stayed focused. I learned the art of patience. I didn't post anything online, didn't talk to anyone mutual. Silence became my armor. Then came the day of the deposition. We sat in that cold conference room, lawyers flanking us on both sides. Ethan looked relaxed, leaning back in his chair, confident that his legal team would crush me. He even smirked at me once, the kind of smirk that says, "You'll always lose against me." My lawyer began calmly. "Mrs. Hartman, could you describe your role in your husband's business?" I kept my voice steady. I managed branding, design, and client relations. I also helped create most of the presentation materials used for investor meetings. Ethan scoffed. "She made a few logos, that's it." I turned to look at him. "Do you remember the Lexington deal? The one that landed you your first $1 million contract?" He frowned. "Of course. I wrote the pitch," I said quietly. Every word. The room fell silent. His lawyer shifted uncomfortably. My attorney continued asking questions, slowly unwrapping years of my unseen contributions. Then we brought out the evidence: emails, drafts, timelines, records of my name on proposals, and invoices he had erased. Ethan's expression began to change from smug to panicked. And then my lawyer slid a folder across the table. "These are financial transfers from unregistered accounts," he said. "Funds that appear to have been moved without disclosure during this divorce process." Ethan froze. His lawyer went pale. "Where did you get this?" My attorney smiled. "Let's just say Mrs. Hartman has a very good memory." That night, I walked out of the building feeling taller than I had in years. I knew the battle wasn't over, but I could feel the tide turning. Weeks turned into months. Ethan's reputation began to crack. Word spread through the local business community that he was being audited. Investors quietly backed away, leaving him scrambling. He tried to contact me, calls, emails, even showing up at my office once. I told the receptionist never to let him in again. Then came the hearing that would decide the division of assets. I remember every second of that day. The marble floors of the courthouse gleamed under the sunlight. Ethan walked in looking like a man trying to hold himself together with duct tape. His confidence was gone, replaced by something else: fear. When the judge began reading the findings, I kept my gaze forward. I didn't look at Ethan. I didn't need to. Due to clear evidence of financial misconduct, the judge said, the court awards Mrs. Hartman 55% of the shared assets, including the Lakewood estate and all business interests tied to Hartman Developments. There was a sharp gasp from Ethan's lawyer. My heart hammered in my chest. 55%. I'd taken the majority. Ethan looked at me then, his mouth opening like he wanted to say something. But what could he possibly say? That I'd beaten him at his own game? That I'd survived everything he threw at me? I didn't give him the satisfaction. I gathered my papers, nodded to my attorney, and walked out. Outside, reporters were waiting. Someone shouted, "Mrs. Hartman, how does it feel to win?" I smiled faintly. "It's not about winning," I said. "It's about not letting someone take away what's rightfully yours." That night, I sat in the living room of my new apartment, one I'd chosen myself, paid for myself, designed myself. I poured a glass of red wine, put on soft jazz, and allowed myself a moment of quiet satisfaction. The emails started coming soon after. Ethan's business was collapsing faster than anyone expected. Investors had filed suits, regulators were investigating, and one of his biggest contracts had been terminated. His empire, the empire he thought he built alone, was crumbling. A few weeks later, he sent me a message. "Can we talk? Please. I need your help." I stared at it for a long time. This was the man who once told me I was nothing without him. And now he was begging me to save him. I didn't reply. Instead, I donated a portion of my settlement to a women's business foundation, a fund that helps wives and mothers start their own ventures after divorce. I wanted to give back to the women who'd been told they couldn't rebuild. Because I had rebuilt, and I was thriving. Months later, I ran into Ethan again. It was at a networking event for entrepreneurs. He looked older, tired, like the weight of his mistakes had finally settled on his shoulders. He approached me hesitantly. "Clara," he said, voice trembling slightly. "You look amazing." I smiled, polite but distant. "Thank you. Business is good." He laughed weakly. "Yeah, mine's not." I said softly, taking a sip of my drink. "Maybe you should hire a better designer next time." He looked at me for a long moment. There was regret in his eyes, real, heavy regret. But it wasn't my job to heal him. When I walked away, I didn't feel bitterness or anger anymore. I felt peace. True peace. Ethan thought he could break me, take everything, and walk away untouched. But I wasn't the same woman he married. I had rebuilt my life, my career, and my confidence. In the end, I didn't just survive. I won. He thought he'd take everything in the divorce. But I took his empire and my freedom. I still remember the first time I met Ethan Hartman. It was at a charity gala in downtown Chicago, back when I was 25 and still believed that love could conquer anything. He was charming, ambitious, and so confident that his presence filled the room before he even spoke. I was working in marketing at the time, helping small startups find their voice. He ran a young construction company, bold and eager to expand. When he asked me what I did, I told him, and he smiled in that way that made you feel seen. "I could use someone like you," he said. "Someone who understands how to make people believe in something." I didn't know then that I was signing up to build not just his company, but his entire dream. The early years were golden. We worked side by side, building late into the night. He'd be sketching out floor plans on our kitchen table while I crafted proposals, drafted websites, or brainstormed branding ideas. We lived modestly, saving everything we could. There were nights we shared ramen and cheap wine, dreaming about the day we'd own something bigger. And eventually we did. Hartman Developments took off like wildfire. One deal led to another, and soon, Ethan was being featured in local business magazines. People called him a self-made man. That phrase used to make me laugh bitterly. He wasn't self-made. He was us-made. But as the money started rolling in, something in him shifted. He began dressing sharper, speaking faster, talking down to people, including me. The man who once thanked me for every small victory began to correct me in meetings, dismiss my ideas, and refer to me as the wife, in front of his colleagues. It started with subtle things. He'd make big decisions without telling me, claiming he didn't want to bother me with the stress. He started traveling more, always for business. I ignored the signs at first, because that's what love does. It blinds you, makes excuses for things that shouldn't need excuses. But then came the late nights. The perfume that wasn't mine. The phone he'd flip upside down whenever I entered the room. When I confronted him, he didn't even deny it. He sighed, running a hand through his hair, looking frustrated more than guilty. "Clara, I didn't mean for you to find out this way. But we've been drifting apart for years. You know that." It felt like a knife twisting in my chest. "Drifting apart?" I repeated, my voice trembling. "You mean while I was building your company from the ground up? While I was putting my own career on hold so you could chase your empire?" He rubbed his temples, like my pain was an inconvenience. You're being emotional. Let's not make this harder than it has to be. That night, I packed a bag and left. Not because I was weak, but because staying would have killed something inside me. For a while, I tried to move on quietly. I focused on my freelance work, avoided his calls, and told myself that eventually it would all fade. But then I got the divorce papers, and the reality of who he had become hit me like a freight train. He wasn't just ending our marriage, he was trying to erase me. He claimed the company was entirely his. He said I never had an official role, that I was just helping as a wife. The audacity of it. He listed assets that were clearly joint as solely his. He even had the nerve to try to evict me from the home we bought together, using his name on the deed as justification. For days, I couldn't eat, couldn't sleep. I stared at those papers, reading every cruel line over and over. Then one morning, I looked at myself in the mirror and whispered, no more. I wasn't going to let him destroy me. I was going to fight and win. The next few months were the hardest of my life. My lawyer, a woman named Danielle, was sharp as glass and twice as unbreakable. She taught me how to be patient, how to gather evidence without tipping him off, how to use his arrogance against him. Ethan thought I was doing nothing. He thought I was broken, waiting for mercy. What he didn't know was that I was documenting everything: emails, timestamps, client invoices with my signature still on them. One evening, I drove to our old office after hours. My name was still on the access list. The halls were dark and silent. I went into the archive room, where I'd spent so many nights organizing proposals. There, I found folders of contracts, ones he had conveniently forgotten to mention. Each had my notes, my handwriting, my revisions. That evidence became my weapon. At the deposition, I kept my tone calm and professional. When his lawyer tried to make me look incompetent, I simply smiled and let him dig the hole deeper. Then Danielle would slide another piece of proof across the table. Each document was a nail in the coffin of Ethan's narrative. Ethan's jaw tightened with every page. By the end of that session, he wasn't smirking anymore. He was sweating. Afterward, Danielle and I sat in her office. She looked at me with a smirk of her own. He's not going to see it coming, Clara. We're going to take him down cleanly. And we did. When the court verdict came in, it was more than I'd hoped for. Not only did I win majority ownership of the company, but the judge also awarded damages for concealment of marital assets. It was a legal, moral, and emotional victory. The next morning, I walked into Hartman Developments, my company now, with my head high. Some employees looked nervous, others smiled, quietly relieved. Ethan had been a tyrant in the last few years, and everyone knew it. I called a meeting in the conference room, the same one where Ethan used to belittle me in front of others. Things are changing, I told them. We're going to build a company that values honesty, creativity, and respect. Not ego. The applause that followed wasn't loud, it was real. Genuine. Later that week, Ethan showed up outside the office. He looked small. His tailored suit couldn't hide the fact that he'd lost weight. His eyes were red-rimmed, his voice shaky. Clara, he said softly, I made mistakes. I know that now. I lost everything. I just want to talk. I looked at him for a long moment. The man who once thought he owned the world now stood there, humbled. I spent years trying to prove my worth to you, I said. But I don't need to anymore. You can keep your apologies, Ethan. I've already taken what's mine. I turned and walked back into the building, into my future. Months later, Hartman Developments rebranded as Hartman and Brooks, with my name officially on every document, every letterhead. Business boomed under my leadership. Clients appreciated the new energy, the honesty, the purpose. One day, as I watched the sunset from my office window, I thought back to everything I had lost and gained. Ethan thought he'd take everything in the divorce. But he only took the weight I never needed. What I gained was freedom, peace, and the empire I helped build reborn under my name. And that, I realized, was the sweetest revenge of all. The first few weeks after the verdict were strange. Victory should have felt like fireworks and champagne, but in truth, it was quiet. I'd spent so long fighting, strategizing, surviving, that when it was over, the silence felt deafening. I'd won, yes, but I'd also lost something. Years of my life had been swallowed by that marriage, by him. I remember sitting alone in my apartment one night, the city lights flickering through the window, realizing I didn't even know who I was outside of Ethan's shadow. For years, my life had revolved around his schedule, his moods, his ambitions. Now there was just me. That's when I made a promise to myself. I wasn't just going to survive, I was going to thrive. I began rebuilding Hartman Developments piece by piece, starting with the culture. The first thing I did was call a staff meeting. Everyone gathered in the conference room, the same room where Ethan had shouted at interns and mocked junior architects. The air felt tense, uncertain. I know things have been difficult, I began, scanning the room. You've all been through changes. But this company has always had one thing worth saving, its people. That's not changing. We're not rebuilding the empire Ethan wanted. We're building something better. A murmur rippled through the room, cautious, but hopeful. A young architect named Mia spoke up hesitantly. Does that mean we'll be able to pitch our own projects again? I smiled. Yes. In fact, that's going to be the foundation of everything we do from now on. Mia's eyes lit up. It was a small moment, but it meant everything to me. Over the next few months, the company transformed. We replaced the cold marble lobby Ethan had installed with a space filled with natural light and green plants. I started a mentorship program for young women in construction and design. And slowly, the company began to breathe again. But as the business grew stronger, Ethan's bitterness grew darker. He started showing up at industry events, always with that same forced smile. Rumors began to swirl that he was trying to start a new firm, that he was reaching out to our old clients, trying to poach them. Some even took his calls. I could have stopped him legally, but I didn't. Not yet. I wanted him to dig his own hole first. And he did. One afternoon, I got a call from one of our suppliers. "Hey Clara, just a heads up," he said. "Ethan's been reaching out under a new business name. Hartman Strategic. Same logo. Same designs. Thought you should know." I thanked him and hung up, staring at the phone. That logo, the one he'd stolen, was one I'd designed myself. That night, I sat at my kitchen table again, this time not sketching dreams, but revenge. I didn't want to just stop Ethan. I wanted him to face the truth, that the empire he tried to take from me would be the one to end him. So I started a quiet campaign. Through my contacts and networks, I made sure every potential investor knew what kind of man Ethan was. I didn't lie. I didn't manipulate. I simply let the facts speak for themselves, the lawsuits he'd buried, the unpaid invoices, the unethical practices he thought I didn't know about. Within 3 months, his company folded. Investors withdrew. Clients fled. Ethan tried to reach me again, first through lawyers, then through texts. The last one simply read, "You're destroying me." I didn't reply. Instead, I focused on something that truly mattered, building a future that wasn't born out of pain, but purpose. I launched a foundation in my mother's name to support women entrepreneurs. I even began teaching part-time at a local business school, mentoring young professionals who reminded me of the girl I once was: hopeful, hardworking, unaware of how easily love could blur into manipulation. But fate has a strange sense of irony. About a year later, I was invited to a business awards gala, the same one where Ethan and I first met. This time, though, I wasn't a guest. I was being honored for leadership and ethical growth in business. As I stood backstage, waiting to be called up, I caught sight of someone in the crowd. Ethan. He looked older, gaunter, like life had drained the color from him. Our eyes met across the room, and for a second, time folded in on itself. I expected anger or resentment, but what I saw instead was regret. Deep, hollow regret. When I stepped onto the stage and accepted the award, the applause echoed like justice. I stand here not because of what I lost, I said into the microphone, but because of what I chose to rebuild. Sometimes life breaks you down, piece by piece, until you have no choice but to become something stronger. I'm grateful for that. The audience rose in applause. I didn't look for Ethan again, I didn't need to. After the event, I walked outside into the cool night air. The city glittered with possibility. I thought of the young woman I'd been all those years ago, sitting beside Ethan, believing that my worth depended on him. I wished I could tell her then what I knew now, that strength doesn't come from love given, it comes from love reclaimed. Weeks later, I received one final envelope in the mail. It was from Ethan. Inside was a single note in his handwriting: "You were always the better one, Clara. I see that now. I'm sorry." No threats. No excuses. Just a quiet surrender. I didn't reply. I didn't need to. My revenge wasn't about destroying him anymore. It was about proving that I could rise without him. That was the day I truly let go. Hartman and Brooks went on to become one of the fastest-growing female-led firms in the Midwest. Magazines featured my story. Some called it a comeback, others called it poetic justice. But for me, it was something simpler. It was closure. And whenever I passed the office window late at night, seeing the glow of my team working inside, laughing, creating, thriving, I smiled to myself. Ethan thought he could take everything in the divorce. But the truth was, he gave me the one thing he never meant to: freedom. Freedom to build, to lead, to live. And maybe, just maybe, freedom to finally love myself the way I always deserved to. When I think back now, it's strange how quiet the end really was. No screaming match, no dramatic outburst. Just two people sitting at opposite sides of a long mahogany table, signing the final papers that ended years of shared dreams. The divorce was supposed to be clean, fair, civil, but nothing about Ethan Hartman was ever truly fair. Before the end, there was the beginning, the version of him that could charm anyone. We met when I was still working as a junior project coordinator at a small real estate firm in Chicago. Ethan had swagger, confidence, and that sharp intelligence that could light up a room. He told me I was different. He said I wasn't like the others, that I saw things the way he did. It was intoxicating. He made me believe we were partners, equals, until the business started taking off. That's when everything changed. The late nights, the working dinners that didn't include me, the dismissive tone when I offered ideas. Slowly, my name began to disappear from documents I'd helped write. Proposals I'd drafted were presented under his signature. I tried to talk to him once, after one particularly brutal meeting where he'd taken full credit for a design I'd spent months on. "Ethan, we were supposed to be in this together," I said, my voice trembling more than I wanted it to. He didn't even look up from his phone. Don't be dramatic, Clara. You're still part of this. I just handle the front-end strategy. That's how clients see value. Clients see value. Not us. Not me. That's when I started to see who he really was, a man who needed control more than he needed love. The control seeped into everything. What I wore to events. Who I spoke to at galas. How I laughed too loudly or too softly. Every success I had became a threat to his ego. Then came the betrayal, slow and deliberate. I discovered the first secret through an email, one I wasn't meant to see. A message from his ex-wife, Lydia. She was congratulating him on our new project and saying how she missed working side by side again. My stomach dropped. When I confronted him, he brushed it off. She's just helping with a few consultations, he said, smiling that calm, disarming smile. Don't read into it. But I did read into it. And what I found unraveled everything. Months later, I found out Lydia wasn't just consulting. She was co-running a side firm using our resources. The contracts, the contacts, all siphoned through fake invoices. When I finally had enough proof, I didn't scream. I didn't cry. I went cold. I started documenting everything, every email, every financial transfer, every whispered conversation. My friends called me paranoid. Maybe I was. But paranoia was what saved me. When the divorce finally came, Ethan thought he'd won before the papers were even filed. His lawyer, an old friend of his father's, came in swinging. Their plan was simple: discredit me, paint me as emotional and unstable, someone who'd contributed nothing to the business and couldn't handle the pressure. I still remember the courtroom, polished floors, high ceilings, the faint hum of whispered gossip in the back row. Ethan walked in wearing that smug half-smile. I walked in with a folder that would end his empire. His lawyer started strong. Your Honor, my client solely built Hartman Developments from the ground up. Mrs. Hartman's involvement was minimal, clerical at best. I waited. Calmly. When it was my turn, I opened the folder and slid a stack of documents across the table. These are financial records, I said, keeping my voice steady. They show transactions between Hartman Developments and a shell company called HL Strategies, owned by Ethan Hartman and his ex-wife, Lydia. They diverted over $1.2 million from our main account. The courtroom went silent. Ethan's face paled. His lawyer stammered, "That's irrelevant to the actually," the judge interrupted, adjusting his glasses. "This goes directly to the issue of financial transparency within the marriage." For the first time in years, Ethan couldn't talk his way out of something. Over the following weeks, I sat through hearing after hearing, watching as the empire he'd built on arrogance began to crumble. His temper slipped. He yelled. He blamed his lawyers. But deep down, I could see the truth settle in his eyes. He was losing. When the verdict was announced, the courtroom air felt electric. I was awarded controlling interest in the company. Ethan was found guilty of financial misconduct. He'd tried to take everything: the company, the assets, the house, but in the end, the judge ruled that he would pay me restitution. He didn't look at me as I walked past him that day. His jaw clenched, eyes glassy. I almost pitied him. Almost. But revenge, true revenge, isn't just about winning in court. It's about living well afterward. I didn't just take the company. I reinvented it. Rebranded it under my own name, Clara Brooks Design Group. Within months, our first major project won national recognition. Articles ran headlines like "From Betrayal to Boardroom," "The Woman Who Outbuilt Her Husband." At first, I ignored the press. I didn't want to be defined by the story of what I'd escaped. But over time, I realized that telling it gave others strength. Women began reaching out, some from business backgrounds, others from broken marriages, all saying the same thing: "You gave me hope." That's when I truly felt the power of what I'd done. It wasn't just revenge anymore. It was reclamation. Still, I'd be lying if I said I never thought about him. Every now and then, I'd catch a headline about Ethan trying to start over. Each venture failed. He'd built his identity around dominance, not integrity, and without control, he had nothing left to stand on. Then, one winter evening, I got an email from him. It wasn't angry or manipulative, just weary. "Clara, you won. I get that now. I lost more than I realized, not the money, not the business, but you. I'm sorry for everything." Ethan, I read it once. Then twice. Then I deleted it. Forgiveness wasn't something I owed him. My peace didn't depend on it. Months later, as I stood before a crowd at a women's leadership conference, telling my story, I caught my reflection on the big screen, confident, centered, whole. The crowd applauded as I ended with one final line, words that had become my truth. Sometimes the greatest revenge isn't taking back what they stole. It's showing them you never needed it to begin with. And that night, as I stood on my balcony overlooking the Chicago skyline, I finally exhaled. The battle was over. The pain had turned to power. Ethan once said I couldn't survive without him. He was right about one thing: I didn't survive. I rose. Months passed, and Daniel's empire began to crumble slowly, quietly, then all at once. Every deal he'd built through deception started to backfire. Clients he once courted now whispered about his hidden debts and shady contracts. His top investor withdrew funding after discovering the anonymous report that revealed Daniel's pattern of financial manipulation and under-the-table payments. That report had, of course, come from me. I had spent years pretending to be the silent wife, but all that time I had been studying every move, every file, every document he thought I was too naive to understand. I had collected evidence not to destroy him out of spite, but to expose what he really was: a man who built success on lies, and believed he could erase me like I was nothing. I wasn't his shadow anymore. I was the storm he didn't see coming. By the time the divorce court sessions resumed, Daniel looked like a ghost of the man he once was. His arrogance had melted into nervous tension. His expensive suits hung loosely on his frame. His confidence was gone. He came in expecting to intimidate me, to twist the truth. But that day, I walked in with calm assurance, my lawyer beside me, and folders filled with the truth in my hands. The judge listened as my attorney laid out the details of Daniel's offshore accounts, the assets he'd hidden under other names, the shell companies he used to launder profits. Every document, every statement, every date lined up perfectly. The look on Daniel's face was something I'll never forget: pure disbelief, mixed with fear, and the sudden realization that he was outmatched. When the ruling came, the courtroom fell silent. I was granted ownership of half the business, the house, and a substantial settlement. But more than that, I got recognition. The court acknowledged Daniel's deception. He tried to protest, to shout, but his voice cracked. I didn't even look at him as I walked past, my heels echoing like punctuation marks to his downfall. After that, I didn't just survive, I thrived. I rebranded the company, renamed it, rebuilt it in my own image. I turned his empire into mine. Clients came back, drawn by honesty and stability. Employees who once feared Daniel now worked freely under me. I didn't need to shout or dominate. I led with quiet strength, and it worked. Daniel tried to reach out several times. At first, angry calls. Then, pitiful ones. He wanted to talk, to fix things, to come back. He even said he'd changed. I never answered. The silence between us became my sweetest revenge. I heard he eventually moved to a smaller city, started consulting for minor firms. His empire, once so untouchable, had been reduced to dust. One evening, months later, I sat on the balcony of my new home overlooking the city. The skyline shimmered against the sunset, each light flickering like a promise of freedom. I poured myself a glass of wine, the air cool against my skin, and smiled, not because I'd won in court, but because I had reclaimed myself. All those nights he made me feel small, unworthy, dependent. I had rewritten every one of them. I had taken my pain and built a kingdom from it. Not fueled by hate, but by purpose. I didn't destroy Daniel out of revenge. I simply stopped letting him control my story. And that alone was enough to destroy him. A few years later, a journalist reached out to profile my company's success. During the interview, she asked me, "What was the turning point for you?" I smiled, looking out the window before replying, "When I stopped surviving his world and started creating my own." When the article came out, the headline read, "She lost everything in her divorce, then took his empire and built an empire of her own." It went viral. Not because of the scandal, but because people saw something they could relate to. The power of rebuilding, the beauty of rising. My story wasn't just about revenge anymore. It was about rebirth. And somewhere out there, Daniel must have seen it too. He must have read the part where I said, "Sometimes the best revenge isn't taking back what was stolen. It's showing you never needed it to begin with." I closed my laptop that night, turned off the lights, and walked out to the balcony again. The wind carried a gentle chill, and I breathed deeply. The city buzzed below, full of stories, some ending, some beginning. Mine had both. I had been the wife he underestimated, the woman he tried to silence. But now I was Elena Brooks, CEO, survivor, storyteller. And for the first time, the empire was truly mine.